My name is Millian Trulove. I'm the Vice President and Dean of Admission and Financial Aid. And welcome to the Psychology Department Roundtable. Just so you all know, you can ask questions at any time. We have the mute on simply because we find it's easier for us to all hear the person who's speaking. But you can private chat me any of your questions, and I'm going to get those questions to our faculty panelists. When they begin, I'm going to send a quick message and say, hey, everyone, you can private chat me here. But you can do that at any time. I might save some of these up and combine them, or I might just ask them at different times. But we've been able to get through almost all of our questions. So I feel pretty confident that we'll be able to get through all of yours. Without further ado, I'm going to invite our faculty members to introduce themselves.
So Kathy, since you're the most senior member of the department, you want to go?
Okay. I was going to say, old person here. Yes. Hi, I'm Kathy Olson. I've been in the department for 25 years, and I'm a social psychologist.
And I'm Chris Anderson, often a troublemaker in the department. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I've been here for 13 years.
Hi, my name is Vasily. I am an alum, class of 2007, and I'm just back for this year as a visiting professor of cognitive psychology.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Corpus. I'm currently the chair of the department. I'm a developmental psychologist. I've been at Reed for 19 years, and I am just going to give a little overview of the department, and then we'll turn it around to questions and such. So our department's made up of about 10 faculty and staff who assist with our courses and help manage our facilities. And I think a key thing about us is that we are an empirically based department. So that means we all use the scientific method to study animal and human behavior. We are a very diverse group, so we apply that method in lots of different ways, but we all make observations. So some of us observe adults, some of us observe children, some of us observe non-human animals, some of us observe receptors and cells, but we all create hypotheses or develop hypotheses based on our observations and then test them using the scientific method. So we all have a goal of creating generalizable knowledge using this empirical approach, and you're not going to hear much in our department about Freud or Jung or some of these less empirically based approaches. So because of that philosophy, we tend to get you working in the lab right from the start as psychology majors. So you come in the first semester, you take Psych 101, which is our foundations course, and you get to hear lectures from faculty across the department. So you really get to know you get to know the full cast of characters basically, and you are simultaneously having small weekly lab sessions where you learn about research methods. And then the second semester of your first year, you take 4 psychological science lab modules. So these are sort of these mini intensive courses that get you actually collecting data, working in the laboratory, getting bench skills, gaining research approaches, and that you'll then be using throughout your time. And then as you move through the major, you take more specialized content courses, you do deep dives into certain research areas that are going to prepare you for thesis, et cetera. And we can certainly answer questions about any of that. The one other thing that I want to just bring out right away, and I'm sure my colleagues will speak to this as well, I think our department really stands out because of our sense of community. So we faculty know one another very well. We know our students very well. Our students are really an important network of support for one another. And it's sort of times like this that becomes really clear to us. We purposefully nurture our community in a variety of ways that we can speak to, but I'd say probably one of the most unique is that every year we have an annual retreat. We call it the Squire Retreat in memory of a faculty member who used to be in our department and is now deceased. His name was Les Squire, and he really believed strongly in community. And so we go out into the woods, all the faculty and about 30 to 40 students every year, including some first years. And we play games, we talk about psychology, we talk about other stuff. We showcase our I'll loosely call them talents in a talent show with students and faculty. And we really just enjoy being together and building community in this informal way away from campus. So we do that every year. I think it's really important for us and for our students. And we have a variety of other things we do throughout the year, like things that we program in collaboration with our students to build that sense of community. I'll say too, we do like the formal stuff too. So we have a weekly colloquium series where faculty and students gather over pizza, where we listen to cutting edge research in the field. You get to interact with scholars from outside of Reed, et cetera. So we do all of the things to really train you in a rigorous fashion, but we have a lot of fun, I think, and connect with each other well while we're doing it. Okay, I'll sort of stop there as an overview, and then we're happy to take questions, or Miljan can let us know what information would be most useful to share.
Yeah, why don't you all, so with psychology, I think some folks have, at least, you know, when I was a psychology major, I thought it was counseling psychology. You talk to people about your problems. And then I discovered some schools consider psychology as science, some consider it as social science. If y'all could spend just a quick moment on your area of psychology and how we view, and where psychology falls among those two for Reed.
Well, you started out with a non-controversial question there, Miljan. You may get different answers from us, I think, depending. I'm fine to go first if you guys are okay. Yeah. So I'm a clinical psychologist. So I'm the one who traditionally people would say, oh, tell me about your feelings. But I would say I very much see us as a science. You know, I use the application of the scientific method to do both basic and applied research. So some of my basic research is how to people make decisions to use alcohol or other drugs, and I kind of study people from 10 to about 25 years of age on that. But then I also do work where we're doing prevention programs in schools or implementing interventions. And regardless of which of those I'm doing, I think of that as kind of a scientific hat that I wear. And we sort of, interestingly, at Reed, kind of bridge a number of different areas. We're allied with the math and natural sciences. We're allied with the social sciences. We're actually in a division with a kind of a loose group of other departments. So that's my response to that.
Yeah, I guess building on that, I mean, I would say, yeah, I think of psychology as a science. I think what I do is science. And for me, I guess the natural versus social science, it isn't that particularly that interesting to me or useful of a divide. I guess I pull on all of those things. As the social psychologist, a lot of the things that I work on, sociologists might be interested in them, or anthropologists, or economists. So I sort of feel like those ideas, but the key thing is that I'm going to use a scientific method to try to approach it, where, if possible, I'll try to manipulate something and sort of see its impact. For my own work as a social psychologist, over time, I've done a lot of different things. I'm interested in, I teach in areas thinking about stereotyping and prejudice, how we see other people, how we also see ourselves are affected by stereotypes that we have. More recently, I've become interested, I directed our Center for Teaching and Learning for a couple of years, which helps faculty develop their teaching skills. And so for me, I've actually been thinking about social psychology in the college classroom. And actually, it's a really interesting time in the virtual college classroom where you're thinking about what are the dynamics that play out in class? What are think of a classroom as a group of people. So as social psychologists, we study groups and how do groups interact. And so I've been really interested in what do faculty bring to the classroom, what do students bring to the classroom, how do we sort of perceive that, and how do we interact in that kind of environment. So that's kind of the main things. Also, the other thing, so I teach statistics in the department. I've been teaching statistics in the department. So yeah, we're going to use statistics as a method to help us understand answers to those questions. So.
What about you, Vasily?
Yeah. So when I started grad school, my program was called experimental psychology. But by the time I graduated, it actually I guess the faculty voted to rename it cognitive science. And I think it's precisely for this reason, to kind of, make sure people do think of us as a science, and have a more clear idea that psychology encapsulates a lot of different fields. So cognitive science, again, I would say a lot of psychologists are cognitive scientists, but that might include working with animals who, you can't really ask them how they're feeling. So, you're using the scientific method with non-human animals. Computer science even has a lot of overlap, or can have a lot of overlap with psychology if you're using modeling right, to predict human behavior. So I did a little bit of that. I study cooperation, social cooperation, and so I was interested in how people's interactions with someone who's cooperative versus not will affect their own tendency to cooperate. And so I had some computer models to see, okay, if you're interacting with mostly people who are cooperative, how will that kind of shape this this trend in a population, right? And I can manipulate some variables in a computer model, and then actually carry out the experiment with people and see if that model holds up.
I think I would just echo what my colleagues say. I think there are aspects of things that I do that are more closely aligned with what we might classically call natural science, and other aspects that are more aligned with what we might classically call social science. I do some experimental work in the lab. I do a lot of survey research and actually qualitative research that might be more similar to what a sociologist or an anthropologist might do. So I think a thing about psychology is we're really drawing on a diversity of techniques to ask questions about human behavior and how we explain that behavior.
Thank you. Quick question. This is in terms of size. How big is psychology at Reed? There are also students that are in affiliated majors. Can anyone talk a bit about size and volume?
We graduate about 30 students a year in psychology and probably about 5 to 10 a year in neuroscience. So that gives you a sense of how big each graduating class is. But we have a lot of students from other disciplines who also come through our courses. So in terms of the total number of students we serve, it's quite a few more than that. And there are some, like linguistics majors, they actually have an allied field they can do within psychology. So we see students go that way. And then we in psychology have allied fields in, psychology majors could choose an allied field like in cognitive science or in arts and literature or in history and social sciences or in natural sciences. So there's a lot of cross movement in that way. Our intro psych course is actually quite large. It's usually 96 students, but then you're broken down into a 16-person lab group. So you have a big community of intro psych students and then the smaller sub-community. Most of our classes are between 12 to 24 students after that. I don't know if my colleagues have other things to say about size.
Yeah, and I don't know, I mean, Milian might actually know the numbers better than I, but I would say that Reed, in terms of you're thinking compared to the rest of the college, typically when it's graduation time, we're in the top 3 and we bounce around between 1, 2, and 3 from year to year. So that's kind of my impression of where we stand. But I think the lovely thing what Jennifer alludes to is I feel like I get to know students from all over the college. I taught the last 2 years in our introductory series and in the foundations course. I get to meet a lot of different students. And I think that's actually what's wonderful about our department is because we have so much cross-pollination from students from different areas, classes are really interesting. And it's not sort of like I'm pontificating and people are sucking it up. I may say something and students from, let's say, sociology will say, hey, but in sociology, we think of X. And that really kind of generates some really interesting discussions. So I don't know if you guys have anything else to add.
So one of the things that I find when you become an academic, you find really strong affinities to a particular academic. If you all had to compare yourselves to one of our more popular psychologists in time, who would it be and why?
Oh. Somebody else go first. I need a minute to think about that.
Kathy, are you saying something?
Oh, we're supposed to compare ourselves to someone?
Yeah, we want to know who your psychologist archetype is.
Definitely Sigmund Freud.
Is that for you or for Kathy?
Hey, no, I do have to tell a story. So they do have something called your academic lineage, right? And our history students in our history of psych class will interview us to find out who our great-grandparent was. So unbelievably, I am the least psychodynamic person ever. I think it's 5 generations back, Carl Jung is my, actually, I'm not Jungian at all, but that's like my claim to fame back there. And then right after that is another famous psychologist, because there was only like 10 when they started. So, you don't have that many great-great-grands in this field. But.
That's pretty awesome. I like it.
Yeah.
Well, using that, I guess I can answer that question. I wouldn't compare myself to B.F. Skinner, but my Reed thesis advisor and my graduate school advisor were both students of Skinner.
And why Skinner? What do you and Skinner have in common?
Well, we know the same people. But I think there is, even though I'm a cognitive psychologist, I think behavioral models are pretty useful. And I think it's amazing how we might see the same behavior in pigeons and rats, even though in humans we explain it with cognitive models and, in feelings and rationalization, but pigeons, show the same type of behavior. So like in my judgment decision-making class, like we talked about the LA paradox, which is that we prefer certainty over uncertainty. So depending on how you kind of manipulate the numbers, a difference between 90% and 95% certainty mathematically is the same as 95% and 100% certainty. But to us, 95 and 100 feels completely different, whereas 90 and 95% feel about the same. And pigeons actually show a similar pattern. So it's, we can't just say it's like this human preference. There's something biological there.
What about you, Jennifer, Kathy? How about you?
Yeah, I don't have it. I guess I don't have kind of a one person. I guess the thing that pops into my head when you were saying this, I was just thinking of right now in psychology and in my area of social psychology, there's lots of people are having lots of conversations about how should we be doing our methods and past research that we've done, can we replicate that research? So there's all kinds of questions about that. And so for me, there's a few people in my field, I go on these Facebook pages or listservs and stuff that are really asking questions about this. And again, there's like a couple of women I can think of, Simone Vizier or Alison Ledgerwood, but there's people where they're sort of, this one woman has a blog called I Might Be Wrong, and so she's talking about these ideas. And I guess to me, I don't know if I'm exactly like these people, but that idea that to sort of take on big questions, but also realize like, we don't really know the answers to these things and we're kind of grappling with them. And so for me, some of these models of people that are taking on really hard questions, but being open to, I'm going to make mistakes and I don't really know these things. I guess those are people that I admire how they're doing that because they're helping the field, but they're also not, they're being really humble in that and also trying to get people to have real conversations about it. So I guess I hope to do those kinds of things, I guess would be my answer.
Yeah, but that also sounds really similar to perhaps how our educational model, this idea of questioning and investigating. Would you agree with that?
I do. I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, I hope we are pushing things and asking, I mean, to me, again, it's the model of what I'm trying to create in the classroom where you're taking on really hard questions and trying to sort of understand what the lay of the land is in those questions, but also being aware that to do that, you're taking risks and trying to, again, to make mistakes means that you're pushing yourself and kind of learning things. And so to me, in psychology, we talk about, Jennifer could probably talk about it better, talk about a growth mindset where you have this idea where you sort of, what you're learning is something that you can grow and improve. But the way to do that is to try out new things and to take risks. And because again, that's what's going to happen as you're growing something. So yeah, I would say they're pretty similar kind of model. Yeah.
Yeah, it also strikes me that there's a piece of this, and it's funny because ironically, I think Kathy's too humble to phrase it in this way, but I think there's a piece around academic humility that's really important as well, that we're sort of on this journey of discovery, and it is about pushing ourselves and growth, and that doesn't, like, that's usually means you're not doing things perfectly initially, but also just that sense that we're on this like very long collective endeavor. And so the idea that any one of us is going to make these amazing discoveries, like there's something that sounds like really romantic and awesome about that, but that's not like the way it works, right? And so if we can be humble about our ideas, right? And that, I think that also helps us to be honest. And that's where we get into trouble in lots of fields, where people's arrogance kind of brings them to these conclusions that are far beyond what the data warrant. So I like that combination of kind of like focusing on growth and discovery and this co-construction of knowledge, and this humility that we don't, no one of us or no one field or no one area really has all the answers. This is a process.
Well, and I would just follow up with that to say, I think that's one thing that's, I wouldn't say fully unique about psychology, but something that I appreciated as a student, and then as my work continues across my career. Psychology is not a solo science. It's not like we're this lone researcher in my laboratory doing these things. So many of my most enjoyable and pretty much all of my work is collaborative. So I'm collaborating with my colleagues who may be in a different field, who are also part of the research project, or I'm collaborating with my students who are also bringing new things. So I think it's hard for me to see it as this figure who's all-knowing, or who is like the person of knowledge in the field, because it's all a collective endeavor. And in fact, I think you learn most even from those colleagues who disagree with you. If you have a debate in the field, like Kathy's saying, you have humility to listen to that. But I think it also helps move the field forward when we have those disagreements, because it's that transaction. I think science is a transaction. It's not a single linear path. We sort of digress from your question there a little bit.
Not at all intentional.
Well, and I think
I
these
really
kind
escaped the hero question, or the
yeah, well, exactly. I didn't have the hero, but I sort of had these values that I liked, I guess. But I think these are the kinds of things that, these kinds of questions about how we do research and what's the right way to do it, or the right kinds of ways of doing it, kind of these ethics. I mean, Chris could maybe talk more about intro, but again, I think this is something that we try to have in our classes from the beginning. So an intro psych you're doing, again, from the very beginning, we want you to get hands-on working on things. I can talk a little bit about, I teach a Psych 207 lab, which is my social psychology lab. And in that class, we're already starting, we're developing a survey actually that's hopefully going to go out next week to students and faculty at Reed and ask them about the experience in the classroom. But I'm having my students try to come up with good questions, and also thinking about, like, they're all going to write 3 hypotheses, and they'll write the hypotheses before we actually look at the data. So they're kind of going into that, what do you think is going to happen? And then you look at the data. And so kind of trying to build in really good methods from the very beginning in terms of how to do research in those kind of classes. So again, I think we're trying to build this out into the curriculum from the very beginning, I guess, is the hope.
So I have another question. I'm going to throw this one at you, Jennifer. If you were to do an interdisciplinary psychology major, would you have to make your allied field the other half of your interdisciplinary degree?
So this is a good question. So if someone does an interdisciplinary major, psychology and theater is actually one we had not too long ago, which might sense anyway. We've actually had more than one: psychology, theater, interdisciplinary majors. In that case, the allied field sort of, wait, correct me if I'm wrong, it sort of goes away, right? It essentially becomes the other. Does it?
I think it's not like there's a rule. It just would happen to be kind of probably take over the other, just you have all the classes to do that major.
Because also.
Yeah.
It's not required, though. I mean, I have a comp psych interdisciplinary student right now, and there is, I believe that student still has cognitive science as their allied field. There is some cross-pollination there, but I think if a student wanted to, you could. There's nothing that requires that to happen. It could happen, it couldn't happen.
I think often the other thing psychology is paired with would be in a division that has a lot of other requirements, so they de facto would end up sort of meeting it, I guess, is yeah. I'm not sure if that is what you were getting at, Milian, but.
Did that answer the question of, that was someone asked the interdisciplinary question. If that didn't answer it, let me know, just drop me a note.
And we may have other things to add depending on psychology plus theater might be pretty different than psychology plus chemistry or something. So we could perhaps speak to a more specific case.
Yeah, and I actually just see a question here, I think, for me. So how common is it for students to have a dual or double major or minor in different fields? So we have had students do double majors. It is not common. We try to discourage it to some extent because it does require you to do qualifying exams in 2 different departments and 2 theses. And we've had a theater psych, we've had a physics psych, we've had people do that. I think often students decide that an interdisciplinary, weaving those 2 things together sometimes is a better option for them. You know, so much about READ is individual choice, right? And so you're young adults, you're making your own decisions. Our job is to lay out what the consequences of those decisions are and allow you to kind of have your autonomy in choosing what you want to do. And so I've seen it done a lot of ways. I wouldn't say it's common though, because again, that's a heck of a lot to write 2 theses and to do individual projects, but some students are really wedded to that. And, you know, we try to make that work for them. The minors are actually very new at READ. That's something that's kind of new for all of us. I have a lot of students who are doing minors. The way those are structured, on average, there are about 5 to 6 additional classes in a particular area that are required to do a minor. So I think the question is, could you have multiple minors? In theory, you could, but the question is, can you get your major requirements done, your group requirements done, your minors? I mean, at some point you have to think, is it diminishing returns? So before we had minors, though, the allied fields are also ways that people explore different ideas or different areas of interest. So I think we try to be very flexible and allow students to do as much as they can. It just, at some point, it's, you know, you could stay at READ for 10 years and have 1,000,000 degrees, but I think most of us would probably not. Well, we've stayed, we can't get out of here. So, I mean, I guess if you wanted to stay with us, you could, but, you know, that's not usually the typical path.
So give me maybe a 3-sentence response. My favorite psychological theory is cognitive dissonance, maybe because I deal with it so often. You academics, you're all in a position where now you look at some of these theories and you're like, I love it because you use it so often or because it's so interesting. There have to be a few that you also think are just ridiculous. That's just not really a thing. And so I'm just curious from each of you, tell us either a psychological theory you love or one that you think has no value and no merit.
Well, I'll take maybe an easy route here. I do research on intrinsic motivation, and I find that the theoretical approaches around that to be very compelling. So there are a number of different theories that explain why and when we're intrinsically motivated and what the consequences of that are. And I think, so I have the opportunity to talk about that in my classes, to read the theory, to talk about those theories with my students, to actually do the research on it. But then also we all live it all the time, right? And so some of the theoretical approaches argue, for example, that we are intrinsically motivated when we feel a sense of autonomy, when we feel competent, and when we feel connected or a sense of relatedness to other people in our learning environments. And I love the theory because the data are really compelling, whether we're talking about intrinsic motivation for school, for sports, for music, for collecting Legos, like for any domain you want to talk about, it seems to hold up really well. Political involvement, spiritual development, etc. And I think also there is this intuitive piece of it. So like in my motivation class, we talk about these theories and we're all living it, right? We're all scholars and students and learners in various capacities. And we can reflect on environments where we feel less motivated. Oh gosh, I notice I'm really controlled in that environment. That does not feel good. Or this other environment where I'm super connected to other people and that feels really energizing. So I like that theory because of, or that set of theories because it holds true empirically, and then also there's a lot of intuitive appeal and everyday evidence that makes it feel real to me.
Jennifer, is it true you can't teach motivation?
I does every other semester.
Well, I'm doing it this spring. So yeah, no, I actually think there are certain individual elements to motivation, but there is a lot of contextual stuff going on. And so you absolutely can set up environments in ways that are going to be more motivating than others. So I think you can. Who hates a theory?
Vasily, do you hate a theory? Chris, you hate a theory?
Let Vasily go first.
I know, Vasily, what you just
I had one that I like in mind. I think confirmation bias, or just, I'm teaching again a course on judgment decision making, so biases have been on my mind. I think they're really helpful for self-reflection. The confirmation bias in particular, I think, is really powerful, which is just this idea that we'll look for evidence to confirm our beliefs and dismiss evidence that disagrees with our beliefs, which is why an event might happen. We both agree that this event happened, but I will say, see, that's proof that I'm right. Someone will say, no, that's just the exception to the rule. And if anything, this exception, this event happening just proves that it, I'm right and you're wrong. So I think confirmation bias is really powerful. But in terms of a theory I hate, I will have to think about that. What maybe a thing that does kind of annoy me at times is, and I guess this is also related to biases, is that if you go on the Wikipedia page for cognitive biases, there's probably 100 of them, but so many of them overlap, right? So there's this tendency to name an effect either after yourself or, with a new name to say, look, I found this. But really, there's quite a bit of overlap in a lot of theories.
Well, I guess I can respond. I have a love-hate relationship with Freud. So I have to say, one reason we don't, we don't have classes on psychodynamic or psychoanalytic theory, but I do cover him in my my class on psychological treatments, because how could you not, right? I mean, this is a historical. But one of the challenges for a department like ours that focuses on empirical approaches is that he's really, by definition, the way he theorized was pseudoscientific, right? He didn't have a priori tests. He didn't articulate a model and then test it systematically. His clients would tell him things and he'd come up with this elaborate theory post hoc, right? That sort of flies in the face of kind of how we think about the science of psychology now. But I will say that there is some love there because he was one of the first to have us start thinking about people holistically. We had really gotten to the point in medicine and neurology, which he was a neurologist, and psychiatry in the early days, of pulling people into parts and not really thinking of them as a whole person. So, we can give him credit for that. He brought us to thinking about that. And also, surprisingly, there are some aspects of his theory that have stood up to cognitive science, right? They've stood up to empirical tests. So I tell my students often, Freud is something where you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. He came from the Victorian era. So every ism and obia that you don't like, he probably had. But it doesn't mean that we can just kind of dismiss him outright. So there's a love-hate relationship there, I guess.
I will just add, I do appreciate that Freud really was a developmentalist, right? He has this series of psychosexual stages, and granted, the evidence for an Oedipal complex is pretty much just not there. But I like that he thought that way, right? That there's something unique going on in terms of the goals and agenda for a 1-year-old versus a 2-year-old versus a 5-year-old versus a 10 or 20-year-old, right? So that's something that I think we don't recognize enough about him.
And if you truly are a Freud lover, you can actually take a lot of Freud at Reed. It's just in the English department. So, or I think there's some in the history and social sciences department. So it's not that we don't teach him here. It's just they're not in kind of mainstream psychology.
Kathy, how about you?
Well,
Last word on theories.
I was gonna. This will sound terrible. I'm just gonna take Jennifer's theory again. So Jennifer talked about self-determination theory, basically thinking about autonomy and competence and relatedness. And I guess just a little thing I would add to it. it was a theory I wasn't familiar with until I came to Reed. So it's not something I learned about in graduate school. My own work, I've looked at self-handicapping and how people try to protect their competence. So I was really, this idea of competence and autonomy were ones that were really familiar to me. And I remember learning about self-determination theory and liking it because it added in that belonging, kind of connected part of it that I hadn't seen in these other theories that I was working with in social psychology. Because for me, like actually, if I'm working on research, one thing I love about being an academic, you have a lot of autonomy in the kinds of things you get to do. You try to get the skills to feel competent in those. But the projects that actually keep going for me are the ones where I'm collaborating with a student generally, or collaborating with some other people. And so feeling that sense of connection and relatedness is actually the thing that keeps me motivated. So for me, learning about self-determination theory, actually I remember learning about it like at Squire Retreat a number of years ago. Jennifer was talking about it and thinking, oh, this is the thing that's been missing in these other theories. So that's a theory that I've really liked in recent years.
So you can see that Jennifer's actually insidious, because I actually love that, but I wasn't going to say it. Kathy can say it, but Jennifer and I published on it. I have an independent paper on it. So she's very subversive with these ideas.
All right, we're coming to the end of our session, and I am going to I'm going to ask you all 4 questions, and you all get to answer one of these 4. And I'm not going to assign them. I'm just going to let you jump in. The first question is, I'd like you to share something that you just really love about Reed, something that you want to share with our guest here. The second thing, something that's really distinctive about our major, something we do at Reed in psychology that we just don't think is offered at other schools, that really helps highlight either our approach or what we think is special. I want someone to give us a really interesting example of what one of our psychology grads is doing or has done after graduation, so we can think about just the realm of possibility of careers and how this psychology program may have played a role in that. And finally, I would love for one of you to share with our students a really helpful theory for making this challenging decision of thinking about where they want to be for 4 years. So that one is last. The others can be in any order.
Kathy's had more students than any of us. Kathy, can you think of somebody who's doing something super fun? I'm just thinking, you know so many of our students.
I mean, I was going to say there's so many different things. And I was going to say, the one actually that pops into my head is sort of almost silly, but it's not. I had a student a number of years ago, late 90s, did her thesis on, it was a student who, again, this was in her thesis, so she would say this: mother died when she was a kid. She went on and became, got her social work degree and went into hospice. So did hospice work as a social worker. So really did that for probably 10 years, 10, 15 years. Kind of found it really hard, and is now actually helps you remake your wardrobe, so helps you and actually my husband hired her for me, and you probably can't tell today, but anyway, hired her so that she had me look at my closets. But basically for her, I think she would say the kind of the skills that she did when she was helping people in hospice. So how do you listening to someone and thinking about what they need and helping them be who they want to be is the same thing she's doing now. And maybe she'll remake herself into something else, but she basically took a psychology degree, got an MSW, did hospice work, and then is now, again, I'm trying to think what the term, like a personal kind of your coach for kind of your wardrobe. So in some sense, I think you can kind of do a lot with the psychology degree. And probably most of my students go on and go to graduate school and go do things where they're doing direct service to people. So.
I don't know that one.
This is totally, Chris, sorry, okay. Well, this is just, you saying that, Kathy's making me think about students over the years. And I guess one thing you all should know is that we really, one of the most amazing things about being at Reed is that we do work so closely with our students in thesis. We know them throughout, but we are really connected with them throughout Thesis Project, and that we continue to be connected with them for years after.
What do you mean by thesis?
What? Say that again?
What do you mean by thesis?
Oh, right. So every student at Reed does a senior thesis project. To many institutions, this is an optional honors project, but at Reed, every single student does it. It lasts for 2 semesters. And in our department, it's basically an empirical project. So you will do a study from start to finish over the course of your senior year. And these are really amazing research projects. There's a huge range of what students do with them. and we could speak to that for sure. But I guess what is notable to me, and I guess this goes back to like the connection piece of self-determination theory, is that like we all know our thesis students very well. And now I think like, they get married and we go to their weddings and they have babies, and what you all are not thinking about babies and weddings, sorry. But the thing is, for years afterwards, we stay connected with these folks. And it's just really meaningful in both ways. And I'm thinking too, recently, we had done this little video for our students, as we have shifted into this coping with the pandemic. And it happened, we have this email distribution list for our students, but some alums stay on that list, I don't know. We post job opportunities and other things, but they like to still feel connected to the department. And what was striking is we got so many notes from alums who had seen that, and they were just like writing us like, I'm crying now. This department has meant so much to me, and I miss you all so much, and it's brought me so much joy to see you all. And so that it was a good reminder of how connected we stay to them. Okay, this is such a long, but the student that I thought of is I do have one student who finished it about 3 years ago, who now is actually the campaign finance director for Representative Max Rose, who's a representative in Staten Island. And she's thought, and I guess similar to the way what Kathy was saying, like her thesis work with me, she used a motivational theory to understand Reed student experiences in their classes and in their, essentially she conceptualized, she described the motivation styles of a variety of Reed students, and then looked at that in the context of how they used social supports and academic supports at Reed. It's hard to put her thesis in a little nutshell, but it was just accepted for publication a month ago. So that is amazing. But anyway, she has talked about how doing this thesis work, which seems sort of unrelated to a political campaign, has a lot of transfer value, right? Where she learned how to like systematically collect data, to contact a massive database of individuals, to analyze qualitative data and quantitative data, to present that in a way that she could communicate with a variety of audiences. So most of our students are going on in a more psychology related field, but we do have a lot of students who do these very different things that really capitalize on the skills that they used in their time here, skills that they gained.
I mean, aside from our students who are now professors somewhere else and hopefully paying it forward like we did to them, we got plenty of students who are at Google and Twitter, and I hear from these guys all the time. I mean, I have a board in my office that has everybody who's worked with me, their senior casual picture that we put up in the department, I steal when they graduate and I put it on my board. And now I've got the baby pictures and the wedding pictures. And so I think that makes us different. I think, I'm sure people at other institutions have those connections with their faculty, but I would say that's one thing I feel like the psych department here, we really do have these lifelong relationships with our students. I forgot the rest of your questions, Milian. I'm sorry.
Well, the last one, I think you both covered something that's distinctive about our program. I think you also talked about something you love about Reed, which I gathered was really the relationships. You've talked about interesting graduates. And so now a theory or two that's going to help our seniors who have joined us make a decision. And, if they're juniors here, they can think about that in the future. It's a good theory they can apply.
As much as I'm someone who studies decision making, I think a lot has to say with your gut. I mean, you're going to find a place that feels good to you and that you feel like I could consider this my home. And I would just say that there's not a wrong decision, right? You're going to find the place that fits for you now. It's hard to imagine what that would be in 4 years, but that's not important. You need to find the place that you feel like, I kind of want to hang out with these people. They're doing cool things. I could see myself growing there. And I think I have a lot to say. What the visceral reaction, I think, is important. I think it's really important.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's funny. I'm someone who I think of like you make the list with the pluses and the minuses. So for me, I make those kind of decisions and I start making the list. But then what I go with is what Chris is saying, and actually it's basically what Vasily was saying about confirmation bias. I notice which list I'm trying to make longer, like I clearly want this one to win because I keep trying to think of more things for this, and this one I'm so I'm making the list, but yet I'm actually seeing what my reaction is as I'm making that list and which one I want to win in that kind of plus minus kind of comparison.
So my graduate advisor gave me this tip, I think when I was trying to decide what job to accept. And it's the same thing you all are saying. And I bet Vasily, I bet in the judgment decision-making world, there's a name for this, but he suggested you flip a coin, right? And if it's heads, it's read. If it's tails, it's the other place, right? And you flip it and then you let the coin decide it. And then you just see how you feel about it, right? Like, oh, let's read. Oh, I don't, or, yes. Or, so it's just kind of like a way to get concrete about checking your gut. Is that a thing in JDM in some way, Vasily, or no?
I don't know what the specific term for that would be, but definitely a lot around gut reactions. And they're not always right, but if we follow our gut and it doesn't turn out right, we still feel better about it than if we didn't follow our gut.
I like that. That's interesting.
So that's the reason.
That's the scientific response. Follow your gut.
So the last thing I'll say is, I don't know if Chris wants to share. Chris has a high school senior who has made a recent important decision. But one of the things I always tell y'all is, it's really easy to think about your freshman year, who you're going to meet, who you're going to live with, how much fun it's going to be moving onto a college campus and doing something completely new. And I always invite you to think about your senior year at college, which is actually much more difficult to do. But we give you a lot of data, we give you a lot of information, and you are savvy enough to take that information and think about the human being you are your senior year. If you attended Reed versus if you attended another one of your schools, which of those human beings are you most excited about? And so particularly when times are sort of strange and weird, allow yourself to look up to the horizon and expand your perspective, not beyond next year, to who you are when you graduate and how you'll develop after having received all of this mentorship that we tell you about. I'm so thankful for our faculty for taking some time to spend with you all. You know what? Someone mentioned the psych video that the department made. I'm going to tweet that out. And so if you want to look at it, you'll find my Twitter in one of your email messages. But I'm actually going to, I think I'll tweet out that video so you can actually check out and see what message all these guys sang.
Well, my excuse for not singing is I was sick. So that's my excuse. I will just say.
Spoiler alert. Reach out if you have more questions. A lot more sessions next week, including the president is going to do a one-on-one interview with me on Sunday. And so you'll receive a message about that soon, and I hope to see you soon. Bye,
Best
everyone.
of luck to you guys. Good luck. I hope you're well.
Thanks.